Okay, so imagine this. You wake up one morning and all of a sudden, funding for your kid's Head Start program is frozen.
Just gone like that.
Exactly. Poof, gone.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Congress that made that decision. It was an unelected advisor working behind the scenes.
Oh.
Yeah, and that's the kind of chaos that a lot of people were dealing with because of some of the decisions made by the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB.
The OMB, right.
Yeah.
They're the ones who oversee the entire federal budget.
Exactly.
Right.
They're usually pretty low-key, but lately they've been stirring up a lot of controversy.
They become a real political hot potato.
That's a good way to put it.
Mm.
So in our deep dive today, we're going to jump right into those congressional debates surrounding the OMB and their controversial director nominee, Russell Vought. We'll be looking at speeches and arguments straight from the Congressional Record, which is basically the official transcript of everything that happens in Congress.
We're also going to dig into some major bills and try to see how what's happening in Washington is affecting you directly.
Exactly. So first, let's talk about the fallout from this OMB funding freeze. Senator Amy Klobuchar laid out just how big of an impact this had on her constituents in Minnesota.
She talked about one woman named Sarah who relied on a rural health clinic that was suddenly at risk of closing because of the funding freeze.
It's crazy how one decision can have such a ripple effect.
It really is. And Sarah's story was just one of many. We heard about research projects being stalled, infrastructure projects being put on hold, and even worries about Head Start programs being shut down.
And what really struck me was that it wasn't just Democrats who were concerned about this. Republicans like Senator Murkowski from Alaska also criticized the move.
Yeah, that bipartisan backlash was pretty remarkable. Senator Murkowski was worried about how the freeze would affect energy projects in her state, and she even went so far as to say that it was a violation of Article 1 of the Constitution.
Which is the part that gives Congress the power to control spending, not the president.
Right. It's like someone tried to swipe Congress's credit card and go on a shopping spree.
And speaking of spending, that brings us to Russell Vought, the guy who was nominated to head up the OMB. He's the mastermind behind this plan called Project 2025. When I first heard that name, I thought it was some kind of futuristic space mission.
Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But it's actually a plan to dramatically shrink the size of the federal government.
So less government, more reliance on the private sector. I could see why that would spark some debate.
Oh, absolutely. And things get even more interesting when you consider Vought's background. He's been pretty outspoken about wanting to dismantle what's called the administrative state.
Which is basically the network of federal agencies that put laws into action and enforce them.
Right. So things like the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration, those could all be on the chopping block.
Wow. And a lot of senators are worried about that. They're pointing to some of Vought's past statements where he talked about traumatizing federal workers and replacing career civil servants with people who are loyal to a specific political party. So instead of having experts who are there to serve the public, you'd have people whose main qualification is being a party loyalist.
Right. And that's a pretty scary thought. I mean, our current system is based on merit. You get a government job based on your skills and experience, not your political connections.
I'm guessing that has to do with avoiding that whole spoils system thing where government jobs were basically given out as favors.
You got it. Remember President Garfield?
Yeah.
He was assassinated by a guy who was angry because he didn't get a government job. And that was back when the spoils system was in full swing.
It's a stark reminder of what can happen when government positions become political bargaining chips. And now we have this nominee who seems to be pushing for a return to that kind of system.
Yeah, that's the concern. And that's why Vought's nomination has become such a flashpoint. It's raising these fundamental questions about how our government should operate. This is where things get really interesting because it's not just about Vought's ideas for the OMB.
Right, it's this bigger power struggle between Congress and the president.
Exactly. You have senators like Chris Van Hollen really emphasizing that Congress has the power of the purse. They decide how to spend the government's money.
But the president is the one who executes the laws. So where's the line?
That's the big question. And Senator Schatz argues that the Trump administration was basically trying to see how far they could push things.
Kind of like testing the boundaries.
Right. They were testing the limits of executive power to see what they could get away with.
So this whole funding freeze was part of that.
That's what it looks like. And even the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, said that the freeze was illegal, but Vought basically just ignored them.
Wow. So you have Congress saying, we're in charge of the money, and the administration saying, we'll spend it how we want. What does it mean for the future?
Well, it sets a dangerous precedent. If the president can just disregard Congress's funding decisions, It undermines the whole system of checks and balances.
And then there's the question of why they even wanted to freeze the funding in the first place.
Some senators are suggesting some pretty unsettling possibilities, like trying to fire the inspectors general who were supposed to keep an eye on government spending.
So silencing the people who were supposed to make sure everything's on the up and up.
Exactly. And then there's the influence of some very wealthy individuals like Elon Musk. Some senators think that these people are pushing for policies that benefit them while hurting everyone else.
Like a kind of backroom lobbying effort.
It's possible. And there's also talk of political favoritism steering funds to states that supported Trump.
It all sounds a little bit like a conspiracy theory, but I guess that's how politics works sometimes.
Sometimes. And then you have Senator Schatz talking about the growing wealth gap. He says that policies like tax cuts for the rich and deregulation are basically shifting wealth from everyday people to billionaires.
So it's like money's flowing upwards while everyone else is struggling to stay afloat.
That's his point. And he gives specific examples of how these policies are playing out in the real world.
It's easy to get bogged down in all the political talk, but it's important to remember that these aren't just abstract debates. They have real consequences for real people.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important for citizens to stay informed and involved. These decisions affect your health care, your kids' education, the safety of your community.
Senator Klobuchar made a great point when she said, democracy is a team sport. We can't just sit on the sidelines and expect things to work out on their own.
And it's not just about voting every few years. It's about paying attention to what's happening, contacting your representatives, holding them accountable.
It's about being an active participant in our democracy. But what can we do when so much of this seems to be happening behind closed doors?
Senator Bennett had some practical advice. He said, follow the money, see who's benefiting from these policies, who's lobbying for them, who's donating to campaigns.
So it's about doing a little detective work, connecting the dots.
Exactly. And don't just rely on social media for your information. Find some reliable news sources, read different viewpoints, think critically.
Senator Warner also talked about how important it is to push back against this idea that it's okay for people in power to act unconstitutionally.
We can't just accept these abuses of power. We have to call them out. We have to demand better.
And I think Senator Hassan made a really important point about supporting federal workers. They're the ones who keep the government running, who provide essential services.
They're often the unsung heroes working behind the scenes to make our lives better. And they deserve our respect and support, especially when they're being attacked and their work is being undermined.
Senator King even told a really moving story about his former staffer, Andrea, who dedicated her life to public service and continued to help people even when she was terminally ill.
It's a reminder that behind all the political maneuvering, there are real people whose lives are being affected by these decisions.
Reading through all these speeches, one thing that really jumped out at me was this whole debate about USAID.
USAID, the United States Agency for International Development.
Yeah, it's not an agency you hear about every day, but it has a huge impact on America's image and influence around the world.
It's basically America's helping hand to other countries, providing aid, promoting development, trying to make the world a better place.
And for a long time, there was this bipartisan agreement that foreign aid was important.
It was seen as a way to prevent conflicts, fight poverty, even open up new markets for American businesses.
But under the Trump administration, things seemed to shift. Some senators were really critical of USAID, calling it wasteful and ineffective.
Senator Inhofe even went so far as to call it a criminal organization.
Wow, that's a pretty strong statement.
It is, and it sparked this big debate about the purpose and effectiveness of foreign aid.
So you have senators like Rand Paul saying that we should focus on problems here in America before sending money overseas.
Which is a valid point. We do have a lot of challenges here at home. But then you have senators like Jeanne Shaheen, who argue that foreign aid is actually vital to our national security.
Oh, so?
Well, she argues that by helping other countries develop and become more stable, we're actually preventing conflict and reducing the risk of terrorism.
So it's like an investment in peace and stability, which ultimately benefits us too.
Exactly. And she also points out that foreign aid helps us build relationships and partnerships with other countries, which makes us stronger on the world stage.
It's like making friends and building trust instead of trying to do everything on our own.
Right. And Senator Coons added that when we pull back from the world and cut foreign aid, it leaves a void that other countries are ready to fill.
And those countries might not have the same values or goals as us.
Exactly. So it becomes a question of leadership. Do we want to be a force for good in the world, or do we want to let other countries take the lead?
That's a tough question. And it ties into this broader debate about America's role in the world. Are we pulling away from global engagement, Or are we stepping up to address global challenges?
There are good arguments on both sides. But what's important is that we have these conversations, that we really think about our role in the world, and that we make informed choices about how we interact with other countries.
Because at the end of the day, these decisions affect not just us, but people all over the world.
And that brings us back to you, our listener. What can you do when faced with these complex issues? How can you make a difference?
Well, I think the most important thing is to not give in to cynicism. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and powerless when you see all the problems we're facing.
But as we've heard from these senators, democracy is a team effort. It takes all of us to participate, to stay informed, and to make our voices heard.
Senator Carper put it best. Speak up. Call your members of Congress. Let them know that we, the people, are watching.
And it's not just about calling your representatives. It's about supporting organizations that are working on the issues you care about, volunteering in your community, talking to your friends and family.
It's about being an active citizen, not a passive bystander.
And remember, change takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes persistence and a willingness to work together.
But if we all do our part, we can build a better future for ourselves, for our country, and for the world.
This deep dive has given you a glimpse into how our democracy works, the debates, the challenges, the possibilities. Now it's your turn to take what you've learned and run with it.
Do your own research. Ask questions. Get involved in your community. And never underestimate the power of your voice.
Because the future isn't something that just happens. It's something we create together.
So let's get to work.